the beginning of this week's Parsha, Parshas Mishpatim, the pasuk says, "Kisikne Eved Ivri Sheishonim Yavoid." Okay, so you buy a Jewish slave. The Targum Onkelos says, "Are Tizvan Avda Bar Yisrael." So he translates Ivri as Bar Yisrael, Ben Yisrael. But this translation for Ivri as Bar Yisrael is unusual. Actually, it's the only place in the Targum Onkelos that he translates Ivri as Bar Yisrael. In the entire Sefer Bereshis, he translates Ivri as Ivro'o. In Parshas Lech Lecha, it says, Vayovoy Apolit, Vayaged LaAvram HaIvri. He says, LaAvram Ivro'o. In Parshas Vayeshev, it says, Re'u Hevi Lanu Ish Ivri Letzachek Bonu. The Targum says, Gavra Ivro'o. In Sefer Shemois, he begins to translate Ivri as Yehudoi. Like on the pasuk, Bi'aledchen es ha'ivriyois. The uncle says, Yas Yehudiyosa. Ki loy kanoshim ha'mitzriyois ha'ivriyois ki choyoiseina. The uncle says, loy keneshaya mitzriyosa Yehudiyosa. Makeish Ivri. He says, Gvar Yehudi. Shnei anoshim Ivrim. Train Gavrin Yehudoi. So why is it that in Chumash Shemois he changes the translation of Ivri from Ivro to Yehudoi? Probably that's as we see in the Targum Yonason ben Azil in Parshas Vayechi on the pasuk Yehuda Ato Yoiducha Achecha. The Targum Yonason ben Azil says Yehuda Ant Oideso. You admitted Al Uvde de Tamar. Begin kach, therefore, Yehoidun lecha achoch, your brothers will praise you. V'yiskirun Yehudain al shmach, that Yidden will be called Yehudim al shem Yehuda. So this was part of the Birchas Yaakov to Yehuda, that Yidden will be called Yehudim. No, is Memela. Rashi from the beginning of the Targum from the beginning of Chumash Shemois translates Ivra as Yehudai and no longer as Ivra. He translates Ivri as Yehudai and no longer Ivra as he did in Chumash Bereshis. But what happened over here in Parshas Mishpatim that he translates Eved Ivri not as Ivra as in Chumash Bereshis, not as Yehudai as in Chumash Shemois, but as Bar Yisrael. So I want to suggest, there's a brisa in Masechtas Bava Metzia Daf Ayin Aleph that says that a ger einoi nimka be'eved ivri. A ger can't be sold as an eved ivri, and this is learned from what it says in Parshas Bahar, when the eved is yoytzei bayoyvel. It says v'yotzo me'imoch hu uvanov imoy v'shov el mishpachtoi. He shall return to his family. Velachuzas avoisov yoshuv. So from this we learn that a ger that doesn't have a family to go back to is not nimkar, as the Gemara, as the Brisa says, and the Rambam Paskins it in the beginning of Hilchos Avodim, Perek Aleph Halacha Beis, Be'inon v'shov el mishpachtoi v'leke. There's no mishpachtoi that he could return to. So the Eved Ivri, it's not enough that he's Jewish. The Eved Ivri has to be a Bar Yisrael. He can't be a Ger. And therefore the Targum over here doesn't say Yehudoi, but he says Bar Yisrael. He has to have a family in order to be Nimker as an Eved Ivri. How should we understand this halacha? That somebody that doesn't have a family to go back to can be sold as an Eved Ivri? Perhaps the pshat is that someone who doesn't have an anchor, somebody that doesn't have a family to go back to, will sink totally into his slavery and he'll lose his identity. Only somebody that in the end has where to go back to, somebody that is can have a v'shav el mishpachtoi, only he can be sold as an eved. It's interesting because we're not talking only about a child, we're talking about adults. But it seems like Even adults need a family connection in order to be able to survive slavery. And therefore, if there's no possibility for V'shavel Mishpachtoi, he's not Nimke Be'evidiv. This idea comes to play in another context in this parsha, because Chazal say that the loisignov that says in the Aseres Adibris it relates to goinev nefoshois, not goinev momen. Goinev momen is loisignoivu in Parshas Kedoshim. The loisignov in the Aseres Adibris is goinev nefoshois, and in our parsha, the Oynish appears the goinev ish umechoroi v'nimtza biyodoi mois yumos. So the question is, we know that if you take something from someone by force, midas habaylim, you're a gazlan. You're over on the lav of loy sigzoil. Like the lashon of the chinuch in Reish Peites, sheloi ligzol koloi ma sheloi nitoil ma she'ein lanu schus boy. Shouldn't take something that we don't have a right to. Bekoyach hazroya, by force, ubepirsum, and openly. On the other hand, the lav of loisig noivu, on which there's tashlume kefil, is like the chinuch says in Mitzvah Nun Daled, ve'inyan hageneve hu haloikeach dovar mi memoin chaveroi mi beisoi oi mi kisoi be'eis sheloi yire bal habayis ve'lo yeda. That you take something from someone without him being aware. Lo yire ve'lo yeda. So how could there bechlal be? Why is the Torah refer to a goinev nefoshes as a ganev? Why does it say loisignoiv, the goinev nefesh umechoroi? I mean, look, the bailim of the nefesh, the owner of myself, is me, and probably I'm well aware of what's happening to me. How could it be that it's lo yire ve'lo yeda? I mean, so it's gezelas nefesh. It's not genevas nefesh. How is it possible to have a case of gneva benefesh? So there is a manda omer in Bava Kama in the beginning of Perek HaKoines that a listim mezuyon is a ganev. An armed robber is a ganev, and that's because since he's armed, you see that he's afraid of people. He's afraid of people. He falls into the category of geneva. And he is not considered a gazlan, but a ganev. If that's the case, then we could have a case of a goinev nefoshes if he's a listim mezuyon, if he's armed. But will we say that the goinev nefoshes is only chayev if he's a listim mezuyon? And what about the mandama that says that a listim mezuyon is a gazlan? According to him, I mean, how can we have a gneva benefesh? So we could say that gnevas nefoshes is shaykh when the person is asleep and he really is not aware of what's happening. But besides, for obviously, it's a doichik to say that the ganze parsha of goinev nefoshes only applies to somebody that was stolen when he was sleeping. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Pehemid Beis, has an iboya that maybe gon vayoshon is potter, and he has to be awake. No, if he has to be awake, how is it possible that it's a gneva and not a gzela? So in the Minchas Chinuch, in Mitzvah Lamed Vav, he writes one line. He writes v'chiyuv zeh, this chiyuv of going to the nefesh dafka beganev avaloi begazlan. The kiksiv. V'goinev ish, v'gam loy signoiv. But he doesn't bother explaining how it can be a gneva. How is it not a gzela? It sounds like you can do it by oifen of gzela, you can do it by oifen of gneva, and he's saying a halacha that you're only chayev if it was done in an oifen of gneva, because the pasuk says loy signoiv, the pasuk says v'goinev ish. But he doesn't explain b'chlal how is it possible. So we can say that, in Parshas Kiseitze, Chav Dalet Zayin, the pasuk says, Ki yimotzei ish, goinev nefesh, me echov mi bnei Yisrael. He's stealing the nefesh me'echov mibnei Yisrael. So the Gemara in Sanhedrin learns from this that Einoi Chayov ad sheyavdilenu mikroivov. That the Goyin of Nefesh is only Chayiv if he separated him from his kroivim, from his relatives. And therefore, if he was Machroi lekroivov, if he sold the person to his relatives, he's potter. You have to have Goyin of Nefesh Me'echov. So it would seem that the Gnevas HaNefesh is really not from the self of the Nignav, but it's actually from the family, from his kroivim. They are considered the Nignavin. Fizeh Avada, it's possible that it should be done Bigneva. It was Shlomi Daito. I mean, the person that was taken is well aware, but he was taken from, it's considered he's taken from his family, and they weren't aware. But obviously, this is not mukhrach, because Avada, it's possible that the person himself is the Bailim that's being Nignav. It's just that there's a Tnai in the Avera that is Einei Chayiv ad sheyavdi. He should also separate him from his relatives. Yeah, therefore, Mochroi l'kroiv of his potter. But does that necessarily mean that the Nignav is the family? Pashtas, the Nignav is the person himself that I took. Do you know in the Pirush Bechor Shor, Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor, one of the Rishonim, in Parshas Yisroi, he writes B'zeh Loshen Lo Signov in the Aseres HaDibros. He writes his here al Hagneva shehi Metzuyo Yoise. It's more common. Shegzela eino Metzuyo Kolkach sheyakehu al Roshoi v'gam yekabloi all of the Moshel. It's not common that a person should kidnap somebody by force, and he says bang him on the head, and then he should expect him to serve him. Therefore, it's more common that it should be done by Oifen of Gneva. It's really not clear what this means. In other words, he somehow, it sounds like he's saying that the derech klal of a goyin of nefesh is that he seduces him into a situation where he can no longer free himself. But at the time, the nignav is not aware of the fact that he's being taken. This is what he says. He says that it's not. He wants this person to serve him. Probably he's not going to do it in the Noifen of Makeo al Rosh. He's going to do it in the Noifen of Geneva. So he is doing it discreetly. So he's a Ganav. He's not a Gazlan. It's not clear from the Bechor Shor if he's actually saying that the Torah only asered b'derech gneva, because that's what's common, and the Torah wanted to make sure that it doesn't happen, or that really Zela is also included. It's just that the Torah uses a lashon gneva because that's what's more matzui. Not clear what his opinion is. It could be that it says over here not like the Minchas Chinuch. It says that a goizel is also chayiv. It's just that the diber hakosav b'hoive, the pasuk speaks about a case which is more common, or that he really is also agreeing that if you do it in an Noifen of Gzela, you're not chayiv. But at least he gave us some kind of a case where it's a gneva. But you know, in the Shilas V'Tshuvos Rebbe Tzalel Ashkenazi, you know, Rebbe Tzalel Ashkenazi is the author of the Shita Mekubetzes, was actually an Ashkenazi that moved from Germany to Eretz Yisrael. And then from Eretz Yisrael, he moved to Egypt. And over there, he became a Talmud of the Radvaz. He died in the 1590s. And he later moved back to Yerushalayim. It's a whole long history. But in any case, Rebbe Tzalel Ashkenazi, in his Shalos V'Tshuvos, Simon Mem Beis, he writes that Hitaka says that since it says in the Gemara, that you have to separate him from his family, he says that this means that the ones that he's being stolen from is the family. And he says, and that's why it's called Geneva, because it's done without their awareness. So he clearly says that it's Geneva, and it's Geneva because the the stealing of the nefesh is done from the family. Yeah, Yavdiletum Yechav defines the hefts of the gneva itself. But there's a problem. And I think that Rav Perlo, in the Sefer Mitzvah Psaji Goin, is more of this, but I couldn't find it today. The Gemara in Bava Kama has a shackle v'tarya legabi the chiyuv of arbo v'chamisha by a goinev shor v'seh utvachoy oy mecharoi. The Gemara has a suffix if that maybe it's only after Yush when the mechira is chal, but not before Yush. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yochanan says, Lagabi this shaila, if by Gnevas shor v'seh utvachoy oy mecharoi, if it's dafke la'acha Yush or even before Yush, Rabbi Yochanan says Gneva benefesh teichiach. I have a raya from Gneva benefesh she'ein Yush b'ayim. And Yechayev on the goinev nefesh umachoroi, and there is no Yush b'ayim. So you see that even without Yush b'ayim, there's a chiyuv on the mechira. So why is there no Yush b'ayim by goinev nefesh? Dr. Rashi, the goinev nefesh umachoroi ain't kan Yush she'ein odom misyayish al atzmai, because a person doesn't give up on himself. So l'chari it's mafurish that the atzmai, the self, is the nignav. And if a person doesn't give up on himself, there's no yish. If the family is the nignav, the family might be miyayish. So l'chari it's mafurish over here that the nignav is the person himself. On the other hand, in the Medrash Rabbah in this week's parsha, he says like this: "Lahafsik goinev nefesh bein maka u'mekalel." If you look in the Torah, the goinev nefesh appears between the iser of maka oviv and mekalel oviv, and the Medrash asks, "V'haloi loy hoya ro'ui lahafsik beinehem lefisha maka u'mekalel shneim ne'emorim ba'onish oviv imoy." Maka and mekalel both have to do with appearance. Maka oviv, mekalel oviv. And in the middle, there's a pasuk about goinev nefesh, which doesn't belong here. It's not about the parents. It's not a sin against the parents. So the Medrash says, "L'mamdecha she'al zeh nischayev goinev nefesh miyisrael la'achar shehu maka oviv u'mekaleloi lefi she'enei godel imam ve'enei makiram." In other words, the Torah is upset about the goinev nefesh because if you're goinev nefesh, you're disconnecting him from his parents, and he'll end up being a maka oviv and a makal oviv because he doesn't have a relationship with his parents. So the Medrash is saying that the reason that the Torah put the goinev nefesh between the maka oviv and the makal oviv is because what's so terrible about the goinev nefesh is that he is destroying his relationship with his parents. So it would again seem like a Ritzal Ashkenazi, that the goinev nefesh is not about stealing me from myself, because really wherever I am myself. I'm being stolen from my family. And that would explain why it's defined as a gneva, not as a gzela, even though I am aware of what's happening to me, but my family might not. But the question is, so what did Rabbi Yochanan say? Gneva benefesh techiach she'ein yush bailam, and Rashi says she'ein odem misyayish alatzmoi. I mean, it's not. It's the family being miyayish, not him. So I maybe we can say that the gneva is taka from the parents, but the connection between the son and the parents is really a dimension in the identity of the child himself. In other words, my connection with my parents is really part of who I am. Yeah. And in other words, it's part of the atzmoi of the son. And if a person is not miyayish al atzmoi, he's not being miyayish on all of his self, including also the part of his self, which is the connection with his parents. He's not miyayish on the connection with his parents. Even though he's taken away and he's in captivity, he's not miyayish al atzmoi, and that includes that he's not miyayish on the atzmoi, which part of it is the connection with his parents. And memela, inasmuch as a person is not miyayish al atzmoi, This connection can't be totally torn apart, can't be broken, so that the parents can also not be miyayish from him. In other words, because if the son is not miyayish on his parents, if the connection is alive in the son, so the parents are also not miyayish on him. And Mamela, that the parents are taka the nignovim. They are the nignovim. But they're not miyayish. Why? Because ain adam miyayish al atzmoy, and Mamela, the parents are not miyayish on him either. Now, a gain of nefesh is any age. So you see obviously that in any age, the connection with the parents is ought to be part of the identity of the son. As we saw by the Eved Ivri, that he can't be Nimka be'Eved Ivri, only if there can be a V'shav el Mishpachtoi. That's a person's anchor. And only by having that, he will he not sink into slavery. But we see another thing, that the foundation of the kesher between a child and his parents is in the child. In other words, this that he's not miyayish is a goyim that his parents are not miyayish. I mean, today children, they like to put everything on the parents. But over here we see that the responsibility is really on the son. His not being miyayish, his keeping up the kesher is what keeps the kesher alive. Like we say, im ein anili mili. Ooh, kishani la'atzmi mani. There's a seder. First, it's an ein anili mili. First, the person has to take responsibility. After he takes responsibility, others will join. Ukshani la'atzmi mani. In this week's parsha, we have him Amor Yoimar Ha'eved Ahavti Es Adoni Es Ishti Ve'es Bonai Loi Eitzei Chofshi. Sounds kind of strange. Well, he fell in love with Avdus. But, people are sometimes afraid to be free. Because being free means you have responsibilities. Avde befkere nichelei. In other words, because he has no responsibilities. He might not have the best life, but it's a life without responsibilities because all decisions are made by the master. And Mamela, people sometimes have like to talk themselves into believing that they're not free. In other words, it's his fault. It's his fault. It's my parents' fault. It's my environment's fault. It's everybody else's fault, but not my own. And therefore, I have no choice. And that's really the Haftias Adoni Asisti Vesbanai Loi Eitzei Chafshi. And we say no. That Oizen Zusha Shama Al Har Sinai Kili B'nei Yisrael Avodim B'Harlach V'Kona Odoin La'atzmoi. We're obliged to be free. It's not a right. It's an obligation. We're obliged to be free because we are meant to be responsible and to make the right choices. Yeah. In any case, so the point is that Hafti es Adoni es Ishti ve'es Bonai is not the way to go, and the person has to know that he is a Ben Chorin, and part of a person's identity is the connection with his family, and that's his responsibility. And I wish you all a guten Shabbos.